The piano had been there for 11 years. Nobody was entirely certain where it had come from. The care home had been refurbished in 2014, and somewhere in the reorganization of furniture and fittings that refurbishments produce, an upright piano had arrived in the common room and been placed against the wall beside the window, and it had been there since. It was not a bad piano. It was a solid, well-built instrument that had once belonged to someone who played it regularly. The internal felt dampened slightly by years of variable humidity, but the action still responsive. The tuning not as far gone as you might expect for an instrument left alone for the better part of a decade. It sat against the wall. People sat near it. Nobody played it, except once, in the spring of 2025, for about 30 minutes. While a woman named Glenys sat on the bench, and someone sat beside her, and the common room was quieter than it usually was, because something was happening that the other residents had learned, without being told, to give space to. Bonnie Tyler had come to the care home to visit someone. This is as much of that part of the story as needs to be said. The identity of who she was visiting was private, which was the thing about private visits that made them private. And the staff at the home had understood this and had been, in the particular way of Welsh care home staff who have seen a great many things and have no particular requirement to be impressed by any of them, entirely unfazed. The care home itself was the kind of place that has been built and maintained by people who understand what it needs to be without being asked. Not grand, not minimally functional. Something in between. A building that communicates, in its carpets and its windows and the quality of its common room furniture, that the people who run it have thought about what it is like to live here rather than only about what it costs to run. There were plants on the windowsills, properly cared for. The notice board in the corridor had photographs of recent outings and a calendar of upcoming events with clear lettering. The staff moved through the corridors at the pace of people who are not performing efficiency but are genuinely organized, which is a different pace and produces a different atmosphere. She had been shown to the room she was going to, and had spent the time she intended to spend there, and had come out, and was making her way along the corridor toward the exit when she passed the common room door. The door was half open. Through it, the sound of a television at one end of the room, the particular muted quality of afternoon television in a common room. A few residents in chairs, the smell of institutional tea and something floral from a vase somewhere. And by the window, on the bench of an upright piano with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the keys, a very old woman. Bonnie Tyler stopped. There was something about the quality of the woman's stillness, the specific way she was not looking at the keys but at them, the way you look at something you once knew very well and now regard from a certain distance, that made the stopping seem like the right thing and the corridor the wrong place to continue along. She went in. The woman's name was Glenys. She was 87 years old, which she confirmed when asked with the slight, faintly amused resignation of someone who has reached a number that has become its own answer to a variety of questions. She had been in the care home for 2 years. She had been, before that, in the house in the valley where she had lived for 54 years. The house her husband had bought when they first moved from Treorchy. The house where her children had grown up and left from and occasionally returned to. The house that had eventually become, after her husband died and her children had their own houses and their own lives that did not contain space for a house in the Welsh valleys with one elderly occupant, something that required a different arrangement. She was not unhappy. This was the first thing Bonnie Tyler noticed. Not a woman diminished, not a woman performing adjustment to a circumstance that required adjusting to, but a woman who was simply where she was, with the settled quality of someone who has come to terms with the terms. She had her room. She had the common room and its television and its occasional activities and the staff who knew her name and remembered which tea she preferred. She had visitors. She had enough. "You play?" Bonnie Tyler said, gesturing toward the piano. Glenys looked at the keys. "I used to," she said. "Years ago." "What did you play?" The question seemed to interest her. Not the interest of someone being asked something unusual, but the interest of someone being taken seriously about something they had expected not to be taken seriously about. She thought for a moment. "Hymns mostly," she said, "and some of the old songs. My mother taught me. She had a good ear, better than mine, she always said," which she said to be kind because she had a perfect ear and I had a reasonable one. The ghost of a smile. We used to play together on Sunday evenings. She would sing, I would play. We did that until she died. Bonnie Tyler sat down on the bench beside her. The bench was not designed for two people of full adult size, but it accommodated them, in the way that piano benches accommodate people who have decided to share them, with the specific, close proximity of two people looking at the same keyboard. Glenys glanced at her, then back at the piano, without comment. When did you stop? Bonnie Tyler said. Oh, Glenys thought about it. 20 years ago, perhaps. More. My husband had his heart trouble, and there was a great deal to be attended to, and I suppose I simply stopped sitting down at the piano. And then when I came here, she paused. I didn't know this piano was here. Nobody said. And then when I found it, I didn't. She stopped again. A slight, private calculation of something. I wasn't sure I remembered. You remember? Bonnie Tyler said. Glenys looked at her. You can't know that. No, Bonnie Tyler said. But you do. You were looking at those keys like you know every one of them. Glenys looked at the keys. She was quiet for a moment. The specific silence of someone deciding something that has been waiting to be decided. She put her hands on the keys, not playing yet. Just the contact, the placement of fingers on the ivory in the specific, returning way of someone who has done this many times and is checking whether the knowledge is still there. The way you put your hand on a railing you haven't touched in years and feel, before you have consciously recalled anything, whether the iron is cold. It was. She knew the keys. Her hands knew the keys, which is a different kind of knowing from the kind that lives in the mind and can be lost. A knowing that lives in the tendons and the muscle memory and the specific calibration of touch that a person who played regularly for decades accumulates without quite noticing that they are accumulating it. She played a chord. Her hands were not what they had been. The arthritis in the right hand gave the chord a slightly uneven quality, the fourth finger not fully depressing its key, but the chord was there, recognizable and present. She held it. The sound filled the common room in the particular way piano sound fills a room with soft furnishings, warmly, roundly, with more resonance than you might expect from an unplayed instrument. Then she began to play. It was a Welsh hymn, one of the old ones, the kind that has been sung in Welsh valleys since before anyone living remembered them being new. The melody was simple and the harmony she had known for 60 years, and her hands found their way through it with the halting, searching quality of someone reading a text they once knew by heart and are now reading again for the first time in a long time, occasionally faltering, occasionally losing the thread for a bar, going back and finding it again. The arthritis made some of the passages difficult. She did not stop for them. She worked through them, slowly, in the tempo of someone who is not performing for time but for the music. The common room had, in the way of rooms when something is happening in them, gone quiet. The television at the far end continued. But the people in the chairs had, without anyone directing them, fallen into a different register of attention. Not watching, not listening in any active sense, simply being in a room where something was happening that was worth having happen. Glenys played the hymn from beginning to end. When she finished, she sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the keys, and the expression on her face was not triumph or relief or anything complicated. It was the expression of someone who has returned to a room they thought they had left and discovered it is still exactly as they left it, waiting. The common room was quiet. Then Bonnie Tyler asked, "Can I try something?" What she did next was not planned. It was not a decision made in advance or a gesture considered on the way in. It was the kind of thing that arrives without announcement, as a natural response to a specific situation. The way certain sentences arrive in conversations, already fully formed, requiring only to be spoken. She asked Glenys to play the first line of the hymn once more. Glenys played it. The same imperfect, halting, entirely true version, the fourth finger not fully down, the tempo of someone navigating rather than performing. Bonnie Tyler sang with it, not Total Eclipse of the Heart, not It's a Heartache, not any of the songs that had been hers, that the world knew, that she had sung 10,000 times. The Welsh hymn, the old one that Glenys's mother had taught her, the one that had been played in this valley since before the care home or the piano or anything else now present had existed. Her voice, that voice, the one the doctors had said was ruined, the one that was unlike any other voice anyone had ever heard, the the torn and surviving and entirely particular voice of a woman from Skewen who had screamed against doctor's orders and accidentally made something irreplaceable, filled the common room of a Welsh care home on a Thursday afternoon in March 2025, singing a hymn that nobody recorded and nobody had asked for one woman on a piano bench who had not played in 20 years and was now playing again. The television continued at the far end. It was nobody's fault. Nobody had thought to turn it off, but the residents in the chairs, the ones who had been half asleep, the ones who had been watching the window, the ones who had arrived at the age where the boundary between inside and outside is somewhat more permeable than it used to be, were, for those 3 minutes, all in the same room, present in the way people are present when something arrives that was not expected. Glenys played. Bonnie Tyler sang. The room held both of them. When it was over, neither of them said much for a moment. The hymn had done what hymns do in the right circumstances, had occupied the room and then released it, leaving the specific quality of air that singing leaves behind, which is different from the air before. One of the staff, a young woman who had come in to check the kettle situation and had stopped in the doorway, was crying. She was not making a scene of it. She had her hand over her mouth and her eyes were very bright, and she appeared to be trying to decide whether to come in or go back out, and eventually went back out on the basis that she had not been invited to anything and did not want to intrude. She stood in the corridor for a moment, and then went to do the kettle because the kettle was her job and it needed doing. 2 of the other residents in the chairs had fallen asleep during the hymn. This was not a commentary. 2 of the other residents had been awake throughout and had not said anything and had not needed to. One elderly man near the window had his hands in his lap and his eyes closed and the expression of someone who is not asleep but is somewhere specific that the music has taken him. Somewhere that has nothing to do with the care home common room and everything to do with a much earlier time, a time when this hymn had existed for him in a different context, and which the hymn had now briefly and entirely restored. Glenys looked at her hands, then at the keys, then at Bonnie Tyler. "My mother had a better ear," she said. "She sounds like she did," Bonnie Tyler said. It was exactly the right thing to say, and both of them knew it. She left shortly after. The visit had gone longer than she had intended, in the way of things that deserve the time they take. A member of staff walked her to the exit, a different one from the young woman in the doorway, who had retreated and was somewhere doing something practical to recover her composure. In the corridor, the staff member said, "That was," and then stopped, because she was trying to be professional and the sentence did not have a professional ending. Bonnie Tyler said, "She plays beautifully." The staff member looked at her. "She hasn't played since she arrived." "She plays beautifully," Bonnie Tyler said again, in the tone of someone who considers the matter settled. She went out through the main entrance and into the March afternoon, the pale Welsh spring light, the hills just beginning to green at the edges, the particular quality of a Welsh March day that is not yet warm but is considering it. She sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about Glenys's mother, about Sunday evenings with 2 people at a piano, one playing, one singing, doing it until the one who sang died, and then not doing it, and then years later coming to a room in a care home and finding a piano against the wall and not knowing whether the knowledge was still there, and finding out that it was. She thought about what it cost to come back to something. Not the physical cost, the stiffened joints, the 4th finger that would not go fully down, but the other cost, the one that has no name, the one that is simply the accumulated weight of everything that happened in the time between the last time and this time. She thought about her own voice, about the winter of 1982 and the studio and the song she had not known she was building toward, about the 30 years after that, when the song had been everywhere, and the years when it had been less everywhere, and the years when it had come back again, and all the stages and all the rooms and all the versions of herself that she had been while the voice had remained, through all of it, stubbornly and entirely itself. About the surgery in 1976, and the scream that came after it, and the doctor who had said she would be more husky and what had been made from that. She had come back to things too, many times. The industry had said her time was done and she had kept singing. The chart positions had changed and she had kept singing. The world had moved in directions that seemed designed to leave her behind and she had kept singing, because the voice was still there and the voice had always known something the industry did not, which was that the quality of a sound has nothing to do with whether the current moment has decided to value it. It was worth it, she thought. Every time it is worth it. The coming back. The putting your hands on the keys again. Even when the fourth finger doesn't go all the way down. She started the car. She drove home through the Welsh spring, the hills greening at the edges, the March light doing what the March light does in this particular part of the world. Thin and specific, and entirely its own. Nobody made a recording of what happened in the common room. The staff member in the doorway had her phone in her pocket and did not take it out, for reasons that made complete sense in the moment and continue to make complete sense in retrospect. The other residents did not record it. The television at the far end of the room continued, and nobody had thought to stop it, which was fine, because the hymn had not required silence. It had simply required the room to be what it was, and the room had been what it was, and that was enough. Glenys played the piano every Thursday afternoon after that. Not always the hymn, sometimes other things. The old songs her mother had taught her, some pieces she half remembered from sheet music she had studied as a girl and was reconstructing from memory, imperfectly and with considerable satisfaction. The staff put a request in to have the piano tuned, which took 3 months because the tuner who served that part of the valley was very busy, but eventually happened. The tuner, who was a practical man in his 50s and had been tuning pianos in care homes and community halls across the South Wales valleys for 20 years, told the staff that the piano was in better condition than he had expected for an instrument that had been unplayed. They told him it had been played quite a lot recently, actually. He nodded and adjusted his estimate accordingly. The residents who had been in the common room that Thursday became, over the following months, something that the staff quietly identified as Glenys's regular audience. Not organized, not announced, simply the configuration of people who found themselves present on Thursday afternoons when the piano was being played. The elderly man near the window came every week. He never said anything about why. He simply came and sat in the same chair and closed his eyes when the playing began, and opened them when it ended, and went back to his room. This seemed to be exactly what he needed, and he seemed to get it, which the staff considered a good outcome and did not interrogate further. Bonnie Tyler died in July 2026. Glenys heard the news from a member of staff who came in to tell her, because the staff knew, in the way that care home staff come to know these things, that she would want to know. She sat beside the piano that afternoon. She did not play immediately. She simply sat there, in the same position she had been in when Bonnie Tyler walked past the half-open door, hands in her lap, eyes on the keys, thinking about a Thursday afternoon in March, and a voice in the common room, and what it is to come back to something you thought you had left. She thought about her mother, about Sunday evenings, about the specific quality of a voice that sounds as though it has been through something, because the voice she had heard in the common room had sounded like that. Not perfect, not polished, but entirely committed, entirely present, giving the old hymn everything it asked for without holding anything in reserve. She had thought, listening, that this was what her mother's voice had sounded like when she sang. She had not thought about her mother's voice in a long time. It was there again now, briefly and exactly, as though the common room had given it back. She put her hands on the keys. The fourth finger still didn't go all the way down. It didn't matter. The piano was still there. The keys were still warm from Tuesday's playing. She put her hands on them. The fourth finger still didn't go all the way down. She played anyway. She had learned, on a Thursday afternoon in March, that this was the correct approach.